So this story starts about 20 years ago, with me playing a masterpiece game that was not StarCraft. Baldur's Gate had that look of reminiscing the clay animation style that games like StarCraft also included, but Baldur's Gate played completely differently, being a turn-based strategy game that was centered around a D&D campaign-like plot. The game was long and detailed enough to include 5 discs within its box set. The character and class customization, up to this point, was something that wasn't being done except by the board game D&D. At the time, the closest game I could have compared this to would have probably been the original Diablo, and I was kind of expecting this game to play similarly to that game. And to be honest, at first I was kind of disappointed because it was not. And that was because Diablo was a much more fast-paced game, versus Baldur's Gate, which wasn't really something until you really understood what it was. In Baldur's Gate, you had your character, but along the way of your quest, you would find party members who you can customize and level up as well. And one of the most odd and unique things about this game, at least up until this point, was that the most powerful option and button in the game was the ability to pause. Games like Stellaris would utilize this in the future, but this is kind of cutting edge for the turn-based strategy game that did disguise itself as a real-time strategy game. And speaking of the strategy, one of the most profound things about this strategy game was a concept of the open world. Although by all standards today, this would not be considered an open world game. There's a certain aspect of strategy games that requires them not to be very much so linear, but this definitely raised the bar for RPG games coming from this point. Even future games with the Baldur's Gate title would not be as good as this game. Games like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. Dark Alliance was a copy and paste dungeon crawler like Diablo, but not as good, which was a shame because for many years, Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance would basically be the name of Baldur's Gate. Whenever people would reference Baldur's Gate, it would be Dark Alliance, never had been playing the original. It did kind of make sense in the sense that I do feel like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance was made for the common denominator, whereas the original Baldur's Gate, it took more of a experienced and patient gamer to understand the game to its full potential. But for myself, I kept up on the most recent versions of Baldur's Gate to keep up with the operating systems that would inevitably keep changing throughout that decade, because the game had a phenomenal single-player experience. But on top of that, the multiplayer is an amazing facet of this game. I still remember a very distinct memory of me and my buddy, probably about 12 years old, playing Baldur's Gate 2, going down a hallway when the windows on both sides of the hallway, which magically appeared, had orc archers firing through them as orcs were rushing through both sides of the hallway, ambushing us. It was probably the most fun experience playing on pause for about 30 minutes, and the idea of pausing a game in order to play might sound a little odd or boring, but the fact is you need your ranged units firing at their ranged units, while your melee units can defend on both sides that they're attacking from. The game is very clearly set out to be a strategy game rather than an action game. I was surprised to see, to my liking, about a decade later, that the Baldur's Gate series had been re-released on the iPad, which I just so happened to have. I was a bit cautious of downloading it at first, because at the time, we all know that mobile games were never really that good. But the game was only $10, so it was worth the risk. And to my delight, the game was a perfect copy and paste from the old PC version. I was really surprised about how well they ported this over, including everything even from the pre-character generation to the multiplayer aspect. And as somebody who used the hotkeys of this game extensively, I was really quite surprised how well it played with the touchscreen. Dare I say that Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 and Icewind Dale were much better on the iPad, oddly. It played so well that I could have seen myself paying the $50 price tag for the Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 bundle on this because, you know, as supply and demand goes, the game is worth $50. As time went on, this cult classic would be brought to the future consoles like the PS4 and the Switch, and I'd have to say that I'm utterly disappointed about what came out. This game was ported over by the same company that ported it over to the iPad, so I kind of expected it to be the exact same port from the iPad. But immediately jumping into the game, the first thing that I noticed is that there was no multiplayer option. And I looked on the back of the case and I realized there's no multiplayer for this game. To me, this is the hay bale that broke the camel's back, because the multiplayer aspect of this game is pretty much half the game. And to play devil's advocate, maybe they will add multiplayer as a patch in this game. I personally don't think so, because at that point they would have to go and edit the cases to say multiplayer on them. Even if you're someone who's not even slightly interested in the multiplayer aspect of this game, there's another reason this game is terrible in my eyes, and that is the fact that the controls to this game are awful. I'd have to say this game, the console version at least, plays more similarly to the game Diablo, but without the experience of Diablo's fast-paced nature. This game is kind of a clunky dungeon crawler, it feels like now. I knew firsthand that the allocation of controls to this game was going to be clunky because of its strategic nature, but I bought it specifically on the Nintendo Switch because I knew that the touchscreen options was going to be the better way to play this game in the end. The cherry on top of all this is the game has no touchscreen functions. I was confused about why this game had been kind of lackluster compared to the mobile version of it, but the answer to that question is not important. What is important is that if you're interested in this game, I highly suggest that you get this version mobile rather than the console version. Not only is it cheaper, but it includes things like multiplayer and way better controls. I'll repeat that again because it's not something that you hear every day. The console version of this game is not as good as the cheaper mobile version of this game. Well, after saying that twice, I need to go take a shower.